Have you ever had that moment when someone underestimates you so badly that you can't help but smile? Not because it's funny, but because you already know how wrong they are? That feeling when someone looks at you, really looks at you, and still somehow fails to see what you're capable of? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the conference room buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting that sickly pale glow that somehow makes everyone look like they haven't slept in days. I sat with my back straight against the hard plastic chair, my laptop open in front of me, lines of code reflecting in my glasses as I tried to fade into the background. Around the gleaming mahogany table sat the entire development team of Vertex Solutions, 12 men in various stages of business casual, and me, Chen, senior developer, and apparently invisible. The quarterly project meeting was running, 15 minutes over schedule already, and I could feel the collective impatience radiating around the room. The air conditioner hummed too loudly, fighting against the heat of all those bodies and machines packed into one space. Someone's coffee had spilled earlier, the scent of it mixing with aftershave and the faint smell of stress sweat. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and continued typing notes as our CEO, Robert Maxwell, paced at the front of the room. "The client is breathing down our necks," Robert said, his voice sharp as he ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair. "The Meridian system launches in 3 weeks, and they're already talking about stress tests. If it crashes during the demo, we lose the Henderson account, and that's 40% of our projected revenue for the next 2 quarters. I kept my eyes on my screen, even though my fingers had stopped moving. The Meridian system was my baby. I'd architected the backbone of it, written the most critical modules. I knew every line of that code like I knew the route from my apartment to the office. I'd been silently solving its problems in my head while I showered, while I cooked dinner, while I tried to fall asleep at night. "We need to prioritize stress testing," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Several heads turned toward me, expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance, like they'd forgotten I was there at all. "I've already developed a framework. That can—" "We'll get to that, Mia," Robert said, barely glancing my way before continuing his train of thought. My words evaporated into the air as if they'd never been spoken. I'd been at Vertex for 3 years, consistently delivering ahead of schedule, fixing bugs the senior guys couldn't crack, staying late to make sure everything was perfect, and still, somehow, I remained an afterthought. Craig Williams, the project manager, leaned forward now, his crisp blue button-down wrinkling slightly at the elbows. "We need Jason and his team to run the tests. They've got the most experience with high-traffic scenarios." Jason Peterson, sitting across from me, nodded solemnly, accepting this responsibility with a grave expression like he'd just been asked to defuse a bomb. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from speaking again. Jason had been with the company for 6 months. He'd never even touched the Meridian system architecture. I'd seen his code. It was functional but clunky, relying too heavily on libraries he didn't fully understand. But Jason played golf with Craig on Sundays, and they went for beers after work, and that somehow translated to most experienced. The meeting dragged on another 20 minutes, with various team members posturing and claiming pieces of the project. I kept typing, documenting everything, noting who was responsible for what. When Robert finally dismissed us, there was a collective sigh of relief as chairs scraped back and people rushed toward the promise of freedom and caffeine. I closed my laptop slowly, waiting for the initial exodus to clear. Craig and Jason lingered near the whiteboard, their voices low as they discussed the stress testing strategy. I shouldered my bag and moved toward them, my decision already made. "I've actually already built a comprehensive stress testing suite for Meridian," I said, keeping my voice casual, professional. "I can walk you through it if you want. It's specifically designed for our architecture." Jason's expression shifted, a flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossing his features before settling into a placid smile. Thanks, Mia, but I think we've got it covered. Different approach, you know? Craig nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. Jason's team is already working on something. We appreciate the initiative, though. I stood there for a moment, my offer hanging in the air between us like an uninvited guest. It's already done, I said quietly. It would just need to be implemented. Look, Craig said, his tone shifting to that particular cadence men use when they're about to explain something simple to a woman. Stress testing is pretty high-pressure stuff. The client's watching, the executives are watching. We need someone who can handle that kind of stress when things inevitably go sideways. I waited for the rest, for the explanation of why that someone couldn't be me. Craig hesitated, then delivered the line that would replay in my head for weeks to come. No offense, Mia, but women just don't handle stress the same way. We need someone steady, someone who won't get emotional if things crash. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder in the silence that followed. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when something so absurd happens that anger hasn't even had time to form yet. I'd graduated top of my class from MIT. I'd built systems that processed millions of transactions daily. I'd fixed critical bugs at 3 a.m. while the rest of the team slept. But apparently, I might get emotional if a test failed. Right, I said finally, my smile tight. Good luck with that. I turned and walked out, my footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The open office buzzed with activity as I made my way back to my desk. Conversations about weekend plans and lunch orders filled the air, punctuated by keyboard clicks and the occasional laugh. I set my laptop down and sank into my chair, staring at the dual monitors in front of me without really seeing them. I should have been angry. I should have marched straight to HR or confronted Craig directly. Instead, I felt something different stirring. Determination mixed with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I opened my email and saw 17 unread messages, all marked urgent, all demanding my attention for various projects I was supporting. I ignored them all and opened my code editor instead. The stress testing suite I'd mentioned wasn't just already done. It was elegant. I'd built it nights and weekends over the past month, anticipating exactly this situation. Not Craig's casual sexism, but the inevitable last-minute panic over whether Meridian could handle the load. The suite simulated thousands of simultaneous users, attacking every potential weak point in the system, measuring response times and resource usage with military precision. It would find the breaking points before any human tester could, and it would do it in hours rather than days. I started typing, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I refined the parameters, setting up the automated pipeline that would deploy the test suite to our staging environment. Around me, the office continued its normal rhythm, people heading to meetings, complaining about deadlines, microwaving lunches that filled the air with the scent of reheated pasta and curry. "You look intense," a voice said, breaking my concentration. Natalie Park, one of the few other women in the engineering department, was standing by my desk with an energy drink in one hand and a concerned expression on her face. I glanced up, briefly. "Craig thinks women can't handle stress." Natalie rolled her eyes, taking a long sip of her drink. "Let me guess. The Meridian stress testing?" I nodded, still typing. "Apparently, I might get emotional." "That's rich coming from the guy who threw his mechanical keyboard across the room when the build failed last month," she said, leaning against my desk. "What are you doing about it?" The corners of my mouth twitched upward. "I'm going to run the most comprehensive stress test this company has ever seen, and I'm going to do it tonight after everyone leaves." Natalie's eyebrows shot up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Without approval? Bold move." "Not without approval," I corrected. "I have system admin access for maintenance purposes. Technically, this is maintenance, preventative maintenance." Natalie studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Need A partner in crime? I hesitated. This was my fight, my code, my reputation on the line. But something about the solidarity in her offer caught me off guard. How many times had I stood alone in this company, defending my ideas, proving and reproving my worth? Actually, yes, I said, surprising myself. Can you stay late? She held up her energy drink in response. I came prepared for battle. For the rest of the afternoon, I played the part of the good team member. I responded to emails, joined a debugging session for another project, nodded politely when Jason stopped by to ask if I had documentation on certain Meridian endpoints. I even smiled when Robert passed by and reminded everyone about the importance of the Henderson account demonstration. Inside, though, I was calculating, planning, mentally reviewing every component of my test suite. I'd built it to be thorough, but also flexible, able to target specific areas of concern or simulate particular user behaviors. It would generate detailed reports, visualize bottlenecks, and most importantly, it would recommend solutions. As 5 p.m. approached, the office began to empty. Developers packed up laptops, project managers made last-minute delegations, and the cleaning crew arrived with their carts and vacuums. Natalie and I remained at our desks, pretending to tie up loose ends as the exodus continued. By 6:30, the SIM main lights had dimmed to their evening setting, and we were alone except for the night security guard who occasionally walked through on his rounds. "Coast is clear," Natalie said, rolling her chair over to my desk with a conspiratorial grin. "What's the plan, mastermind?" I turned my monitor toward her, showing the interface of my testing suite. It was clean, minimal, with a dashboard displaying various system metrics in real time. We're going to simulate 30,000 concurrent users performing a mix of operations on the Meridian system. The test will ramp up gradually over 2 hours, monitoring response times, error rates, and resource utilization. Natalie whistled low. 30,000? The client's projecting maximum 10,000 in the first year. Exactly, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. We're not just testing for what they're expecting. We're testing for what could happen if they're wildly successful or if they get hit with unexpected traffic spikes. I initiated the deployment to our staging environment, watching as my code came to life. The testing suite began its work, first with 100 simulated users, then 500, the numbers ticking upward as various metrics began populating the dashboard. Natalie pulled up a chair beside me, her eyes scanning the data as it appeared. "This is incredible," she murmured. "You built this alone? When?" I shrugged, not taking my eyes off the screen. Nights, weekends. I knew we'd need it eventually. And let me guess, you were never going to get credit for it if you'd just handed it over to Jason's team. I didn't answer immediately, watching as the first warning thresholds were approached as the simulated user count passed 2,000. "It's not about credit," I said finally, but we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It was about being seen. Really, seen for what I could do, about not being dismissed or overlooked or explained away. The first hour passed quickly as we monitored the system's performance. I made notes as small issues appeared, cataloging them for later fixes. Most were minor: inefficient database queries, memory leaks in rarely used functions, caching strategies that could be optimized. But as the user count approached 15,000, we hit our first significant bottleneck. There, Natalie pointed at a graph that had suddenly spiked upward. "Database connection pool is maxing out." I nodded, already typing commands to get a closer look at what was happening. "The connection pooling strategy isn't scaling properly. See how the wait times are increasing exponentially?" I pulled up the relevant code module, one that Jason had contributed, I noted silently, and quickly identified the issue. "Can you fix it now?" Natalie asked, eyes still on the steadily climbing graphs. I shook my head. "Not without stopping the test. But I'm documenting everything, We'll have a complete report of issues and recommended fixes by morning. As we pushed past 20,000 simulated users, more problems began to surface. A memory leak in one of the API endpoints, inefficient sorting algorithms that became painfully apparent under load, authentication services that couldn't keep up with, the request volume. I documented each one meticulously, already formulating solutions in my head. Through it all, the core of the system, the parts I'd personally architected, held strong. There were strains and pressures, but no catastrophic failures. I felt a quiet pride watching my work withstand the onslaught, even as other components faltered around it. "We should order food," Natalie said as 9 p.m. approached and the test continued to run. "This is going to be a long night." We ordered Thai food and ate at our desks, eyes rarely leaving the screens as the simulated user count climbed past 25,000. The building had grown quiet around us, with only the hum of servers and the distant sound of vacuum cleaners breaking the silence. "Why are you still here?" I asked Natalie suddenly, realizing I'd never properly thanked her for staying. "This isn't your project." She shrugged, twirling noodles around her fork. "Because I've been where you are. Because I'm tired of watching. Brilliant women get passed over by mediocre men. Because what you're doing matters." I nodded, oddly touched by her simple answer. "Well, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said, pointing at the screen. "Look at that response time graph." I turned back to see that one of our payment processing endpoints was showing dangerous latency as the user count approached 28,000. "That's not good," I murmured, diving into the code to identify the cause. By midnight, the test had completed its full cycle, simulating all 30,000 users performing various operations across the Meridian system. The results were sprawled. Across my monitors, graphs, logs, error reports, and performance metrics. Some components had performed admirably, while others had buckled under the pressure. "So what's the verdict?" Natalie asked, stifling a yawn as she gathered our empty food containers. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the complete picture. "The system won't crash during the client demo," I said confidently. "But there are at least 12 critical optimizations needed if they want to scale beyond 10,000 users. Most of them are fixable within the timeline if we prioritize correctly." "And by we, you mean you," Natalie said, raising an eyebrow. I smiled. Slightly. "Well, someone has to fix them." We spent the next 2 hours compiling the results into a comprehensive report. I was meticulous, making sure every issue was documented with evidence from the test, along with recommended solutions prioritized by impact and effort required. For each problem, I included snippets of the code that would need to be modified, estimated time to implement, and potential risks. By 2:30 a.m., the report was complete. 27 pages of detailed analysis and recommendations, with supporting data visualizations and comparative benchmarks. I saved it as a PDF, then hesitated, cursor hovering over the send button in my email client. "What are you waiting for?" Natalie asked, gathering her things to leave. I stared at the screen, at the email addressed to Robert, Craig, Jason, and the rest of the development team. "I'm trying to decide if this is career suicide or the smartest move I've ever made." Natalie zipped up her jacket, considering. "It could be both. But you know what? They need what you've done here. And if they're smart enough to see that, great. If not..." She trailed off, shrugging. I thought about Craig's words again. Women just don't handle stress the same way. He was right, but not in the way he meant. Under stress, I didn't panic or get emotional. I got methodical. I solved problems. I built solutions. I hit send. The walk to my car in the empty parking garage was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing. Off concrete as I replayed the events of the day in my head. The cool night air felt good after hours in the artificial environment of the office. As I drove home through empty streets, I wondered if I'd still have a job tomorrow. I'd used company resources without explicit approval, stayed after hours, and essentially gone over my manager's head with my findings. But beneath the anxiety was something else. A sense of rightness, of having done what needed to be done regardless of the consequences. I'd let my work speak for itself, louder and clearer than any argument I could have made in that conference room. My apartment was dark and quiet when I arrived home. I fed my cat, Turing, who greeted me with sleepy indignation at the late hour. Too wired to sleep despite my exhaustion, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tension of the day. As I finally crawled into bed around 4 a.m., I set my alarm for 8 a.m., determined to be in the office early to face whatever came next. Sleep claimed me quickly, but it felt like only minutes had passed when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Disoriented, I fumbled for it in the darkness, squinting at the screen. 6:47 a.m., Robert Maxwell calling. My heart leapt into my throat as I answered. "Hello? Mia." Robert's voice was clipped, professional. "I've been reviewing your report." I sat up, suddenly wide awake. "Yes?" There was a pause, and I braced myself for the reprimand, the accusations of overstepping, the possible termination. "I need you in the office by 8. We're having an emergency meeting with the dev team." Another pause. "Good work, by the way. Very thorough." The call ended before I could respond. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then at my cat, who was watching me with typical feline indifference. "I think I might not be fired," I told him. Turing yawned in response. I arrived at the office at 7:45, hair still damp from my hurried shower, clutching a large coffee like a lifeline. The building was oddly busy for this hour, with developers I rarely saw before 10 a.m. already at their desks, typing furiously or huddled in small groups. Natalie intercepted me as I walked toward my desk. "Your report went viral," she said without preamble, falling into step beside me. "What do you mean viral?" "It was an internal email. Robert forwarded it to everyone involved in Meridian, including the client's CTO. Apparently, he read it at 5 a.m. and has been making calls ever since." She lowered her voice. "Jason looks like someone stole his puppy." I fought down a surge of vindictive pleasure at that last bit. "Where's the meeting?" "Main conference room. Everyone's already gathering." She squeezed my arm. "Go get 'em, Tiger." The main conference room was nearly full when I entered, a stark contrast to yesterday when I'd sat ignored at the same table. Robert stood at the front, my report projected, onto the wall screen behind him. Craig and Jason sat together, both looking distinctly uncomfortable. Other developers, QA engineers, and even some people from the business team filled the remaining seats. A hush fell as I entered, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Robert nodded in acknowledgement. "Mia, good." We were about to begin. I took the only available seat, ironically at the head of the table opposite Robert. My coffee sat untouched in front of me as Robert began speaking. For those who haven't had a chance to review it yet, last night Chen conducted a comprehensive stress test of the Meridian system ahead of our client demonstration. Her findings identify several critical issues that need immediate attention if we want to deliver a stable product. He clicked through to a page of my report showing one of the more dramatic failure graphs. As you can see, under the projected load, several key components would fail catastrophically. What's most concerning is that none of our standard testing protocols would have caught these issues before the client demo. Craig shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Jason stared intently at his laptop, avoiding all eye contact. "I've spoken with Henderson's CTO this morning," Robert continued. "He was impressed with the thoroughness of our testing and relieved that we identified these issues before deployment. He's agreed to give us an additional 2 weeks to implement the fixes Mia has outlined." Murmurs spread around the table. 2 extra weeks was unheard of with a client as demanding as Henderson. I sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. "We'll be restructuring the final phase of this project," Robert said, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on me. Mia will be leading the optimization effort, with authority to assign resources as needed to implement her recommendations. Craig will support from the PM side, ensuring she has whatever she needs. Craig's face had gone a peculiar shade of red. Robert, if I could just... We can discuss details later, Craig. Robert cut him off smoothly. Right now, I need everyone to understand the gravity of what Mia uncovered and the work ahead of us. For the next hour, I found myself walking the team through my findings, explaining the methodologies I'd used, and outlining the approach for fixes. People who had never asked my opinion before were suddenly taking notes on my words, asking questions, engaging with my ideas. It was surreal, validating, and exhausting all at once. When the meeting finally concluded, people filed out with new assignments and a renewed sense of urgency. I gathered my things slowly, still processing the dramatic shift in my standing that had occurred overnight. Mia, Robert said as the room emptied. A word? I nodded, bracing myself. Despite everything, I had still broken protocol, used company resources without approval, potentially overstepped my role. When we were alone, Robert closed the door and sat across from me. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you come to me directly with your concerns about the stress testing plan?" he asked finally. I considered my answer carefully. I tried to raise the issue in yesterday's meeting. I was told it was being handled by Craig and Jason, Robert said, nodding slowly. And what exactly did Craig say to you afterward? I met his gaze steadily. He said that women don't handle stress the same way men do, and they needed someone who wouldn't get emotional if things crashed. Robert's expression darkened. I see. So I decided to demonstrate how I handle stress, I continued, a slight edge entering my voice. By anticipating problems, building solutions, and delivering results under pressure. Robert was quiet for a moment, then let out a short laugh. Well, you certainly made your point. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. No, I've been trying to figure out who to promote to lead architect for our new financial services division. After last night, I think I have my answer. I blinked, caught completely off guard. Lead architect? The team is yours if you want it. You'll have autonomy in building the architecture, selecting technologies, and hiring your team. He smiled slightly. And I think you've proven you can handle the stress. As I walked out of that conference room, my mind was spinning with possibilities. Lead architect, my own team, my own vision, the chance to build something from the ground up without having to fight for every inch of respect. It was everything I'd been working toward. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Verdict? I wrote back, lead architect, financial services division. 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by a string of celebration emojis. I smiled, slipping my phone back into my pocket as I headed to my desk. There was still work to do. On Meridian, a team to organize, solutions to implement. As I passed Craig's office, I saw him inside, talking animatedly with Jason. They both fell silent when they noticed me. I could have walked by, could have savored their discomfort from a distance. Instead, I stopped and leaned against the doorframe. I'll need a breakdown of who's available for the optimization work, I said calmly. Can you have that to me by lunch, Craig? He nodded stiffly. Of course. Great. And Jason? I turned to him, keeping my tone professional despite the satisfaction bubbling inside me. I'll need you to document all the connection pooling code you implemented. That's going to be our first priority fix. Right, he muttered. I'll get on that. I smiled. Perfect. We're under a lot of pressure to deliver these fixes, but I'm sure we can all handle the stress. Without waiting for a response, I continued to my desk, my steps lighter than they had been in months. Through the glass walls of the office, I could see the city stretching out below us, already bustling with morning activity. People rushing to meetings, chasing deadlines, building things, breaking things, fixing things. I opened my laptop and got to work. There would be other battles, other rooms where I would be underestimated, other men who would question my capabilities or my composure under pressure. But for now, in this moment, I had done what I do best. Solved the problem, not just the technical one, but the human one too. Sometimes the most powerful response to doubt isn't anger or argument. Sometimes it's simply proving them wrong. The promotion to lead architect changed everything and nothing all at once. I still arrived at the office by 7:30 each morning, still drank the same mediocre coffee from the break room, still typed away at the same desk with its slightly wobbly right corner. But the atmosphere around me had shifted like weather-changing seasons. People who had previously looked through me now sought my input. Developers who had dismissed my suggestions now implemented them without question. I had my own team now, hand-picked and eager. 3 junior developers who looked at me with respect I'd fought years to earn. 6 months had passed since that night of the stress test. The Meridian system had launched successfully, impressing the client so thoroughly they'd signed on for 3 additional projects. My financial services division was taking shape, with architecture plans approved and development well underway. On paper, everything was perfect. Career trajectory pointing skyward, respect from colleagues established, technical challenges engaging without being overwhelming. I should have been satisfied. But beneath the surface, something felt unfinished. Craig still managed several key projects, his manner toward me professionally cordial but undercut with resentment. Jason had been reassigned to another team but remained influential among the senior developers. And while Robert had championed my promotion, the company culture remained largely unchanged, a place where women comprised less than 20% of the technical staff, and even fewer reached leadership positions. I discovered this one rainy Tuesday morning while reviewing quarterly hiring reports. The numbers were stark. Out of 16 new technical hires, only 2 were women. Both were junior roles, despite several senior female candidates having been interviewed. I sat back in my chair, rain pattering against the window beside me, and considered what this meant. My individual success hadn't changed the system. I'd proven myself an exception, but hadn't altered the rule. "You're frowning at that spreadsheet like it personally offended you," Natalie said, setting a fresh coffee on my desk. Since the stress test incident, our friendship had deepened into a genuine alliance. She'd become QA lead for my financial services division, bringing her meticulous attention to detail and unflinching honesty to every review. "Looking at the new hire breakdown," I replied, turning my screen toward her. "Not exactly progress." She studied the numbers, her expression darkening. 2 out of 16, and let me guess, both junior positions? I nodded. Meanwhile, we hired 4 senior male developers, all with less experience than at least 3 women I know were in the final round of interviews. Natalie perched on the edge of my desk, lowering her voice. "You know Derek in HR showed me the salary bands last month? The men in your position are making 12% more on average." I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation stung nonetheless. 12% for doing the same job with the same title, and in my case, demonstrably better results. "So, what are you going to do about it?" Natalie asked, her dark eyes sharp with challenge. It was a fair question. I'd focused so completely on proving myself individually that I'd neglected the broader issue. What good was breaking through the glass ceiling if I didn't help clear the path for others? For women like Natalie, for the talented female candidates, being passed over, for the junior developers on my team who deserved the same opportunities I'd fought for. "I need more data," I said finally, already formulating a plan. "If I'm going to address this, I need to understand exactly how deep the problem goes." That evening, I stayed late, waiting until the office emptied before accessing the HR database. As lead architect, I had elevated permissions, ostensibly to review technical backgrounds of candidates for my team, but the system had few meaningful restrictions once you were inside. I created a secure, anonymized dataset containing hiring, patterns, salary information, promotion rates, and performance reviews across gender lines for the past 5 years. The results were even worse than I'd anticipated. Women were hired at lower rates, paid less at every level, promoted more slowly despite equivalent or superior performance metrics, and assigned fewer high-visibility projects. The data showed a clear, undeniable pattern of systemic bias. Not the kind that made headlines or resulted in lawsuits, just the quiet, persistent kind that shaped careers and lives through 1,000 small disadvantages. I compiled my findings into a detailed report, complete with visualizations that made the patterns unmistakable. Then I hesitated, cursor hovering over the save button. This wasn't like the stress test. This wasn't about code or systems or technical competence. This was directly challenging the company's culture and practices. There would be defensiveness, denial, perhaps even retaliation. Was I ready for that fight? I thought about the junior developer on my team, Sophia, who stayed late developing a compiler optimization that saved 30% processing time, only to have a male colleague presented at the department meeting. I thought about Natalie being told she was too aggressive in code reviews when her male counterparts were praised for thoroughness. I thought about all the subtle ways I'd been diminished, dismissed, and underestimated throughout my career. I saved the report. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Robert, marking it confidential and high priority. He responded immediately, offering his 2 p.m. slot. As the hours crawled by, I rehearsed my approach, anticipating objections, preparing evidence. By the time I walked into his office, my heartbeat was steady, but my palms were damp. Robert's corner office overlooked the river, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. He gestured me to a chair across from his desk, his expression curious but relaxed. "Mia, what can I do for you? Problems with the financial services project?" "The project is on track," I said, placing my tablet on his desk. "I'm here about something else, something I think you need to see." I pushed the tablet toward him, open to the executive summary of my report. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read the title, Gender Disparities at Vertex Solutions, a Data Analysis. He glanced up at me, then back at the screen, his expression unreadable as he began to scroll through the document. I waited in silence, watching as his face shifted from neutral to concerned to something more complex. He read thoroughly, occasionally tapping to expand a chart or data table, lips pressed together in concentration. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, he set the tablet down and looked at me directly. "This is comprehensive," he said, carefully. "And troubling, if accurate." "The data speaks for itself," I replied evenly. "Women at Vertex are hired less frequently, paid less consistently, promoted more slowly, and given fewer opportunities for advancement, despite equal or superior performance metrics." Robert leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him. "What exactly are you asking for here, Mia?" It was the question I'd been waiting for. "I'm asking for your support in addressing these disparities systematically, not just for my benefit, but for every woman at Vertex, present and future." "And if I say this needs to go through proper channels, HR, diversity committees, the usual procedures?" I met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Robert, the usual procedures are part of the problem. This data shows that our existing systems aren't working. We need direct action from leadership." He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with new intensity. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the business implications, the potential risks, the personal and political capital it would cost him to champion this cause. Then something shifted in his expression, resolve replacing caution. "What do you propose?" I laid out my plan: a comprehensive review of hiring practices, transparent salary bands to eliminate negotiation disparities, structured promotion criteria to reduce subjective bias, and mentorship programs to support junior female employees. Each element was backed by data showing both the problem it addressed and the potential benefits to the company. As I spoke, Robert took notes, asking occasional questions but mostly listening with focused attention. When I finished, he didn't immediately respond, instead walking to the window and gazing out at the city below, hands clasped behind his back. "You know," he said finally, "my daughter just started her computer science degree. She's brilliant, top of her class, passionate about AI ethics. But she calls me sometimes after class, frustrated because male classmates talk over her, or professors overlook her raised hand." He turned back to face me. "I tell her things will be different when she enters the workforce. That merit will matter more than gender. Your report suggests I've been lying to her." The personal admission caught me off guard. In 3 years, I'd never heard Robert mention his family, let alone share something so revealing. "Not lying," I said carefully. "Maybe just hopeful without evidence." A small smile flickered across his face. Diplomatic. "The good news," I continued, "is that we can make it true. We can build the meritocracy we claim to be." Robert nodded slowly, decision visibly forming. "Draft a formal proposal for the board. I'll put it on the agenda for next month's meeting. And in the meantime, I want you to lead a task force to develop implementation plans for each element of your strategy. Choose your team, set your schedule, use whatever resources you need." I felt a surge of cautious optimism. It wasn't an immediate victory, but it was a meaningful start, an acknowledgement of the problem and a commitment to address it. "Thank you. I appreciate your support." "Don't thank me yet," Robert warned. "This won't be easy. There will be resistance. Some of it open, much of it covert. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about all the battles I'd already fought, all the small indignities and major obstacles I'd overcome to reach this point. "I am." Word of the Gender Equity Task Force spread quickly. By the end of the week, I had a team of 7 women and 2 men from across departments, all committed to the cause. We claimed a small conference room as our headquarters, walls soon covered with data visualizations, strategy maps, and implementation timelines. The energy was electric. People who had felt individually powerless finding collective strength in shared purpose. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Walking through the office, I occasionally caught snippets of conversation that went silent as I approached. There were eye rolls in meetings when the task force was mentioned, dismissive comments about political correctness, and the inevitable accusations of seeking special treatment rather than equality. Craig was particularly vocal, questioning the methodology of my analysis and suggesting the disparities resulted from natural differences in career priorities rather than systemic bias. One morning, about 2 weeks into our work, I arrived to find Sophia, my junior developer, waiting anxiously by my desk. "Everything okay?" I asked, noting her fidgeting hands and averted gaze. I don't know if I should tell you this," she began hesitantly. "But yesterday I overheard Jason and some other senior devs talking in the break room. They were saying the only reason you got promoted was because the company needed a female executive for diversity stats, and that the task force is just you trying to get special treatment for your friends." I felt the familiar heat of anger rise in my chest but kept my expression neutral. "Thank you for telling me, Sophia. Unfortunately, that kind of resistance is expected." "Doesn't it bother you?" she asked, her young face troubled. "What they're saying?" I considered her question carefully. Sophia was brilliant but inexperienced, still learning to navigate the complex social terrain of tech workplaces. My answer mattered not just for her immediate concern, but for how she would handle similar situations throughout her career. "Of course it bothers me," I admitted, setting my bag down and turning to face her fully. "But I've learned to distinguish between criticism of my ideas, which I welcome, and attempts to undermine my legitimacy, which I ignore. The data in our report is sound. The problems we're addressing are real. Their discomfort with that reality isn't my concern." Sophia nodded slowly, processing this. "They also said the board will never approve anything substantial." At this, I smiled slightly. That remains to be seen. But even if they're right, even if we don't get everything we're asking for, we've already succeeded in one important way. We've made the issue impossible to ignore. Sometimes visibility is the first step toward change. She seemed reassured, straightening her shoulders and returning my smile. "The visualization tool you asked for is ready, by the way. I added the feature to break down by department and tenure as well." "Excellent. Let's review it this morning." As Sophia walked away, I reflected on our conversation. The resistance we faced wasn't surprising, but it was telling. People rarely fight against changes they believe are unimportant. The backlash confirmed what the data had already shown: that the current system benefited some at the expense of others, and those benefiting weren't eager to level the playing field. The task force work intensified as the board meeting approached. We refined our proposals, gathered additional data, prepared presentations, and developed detailed implementation plans. I worked longer hours than ever, often leaving the office well after midnight, fueled by coffee and determination. One evening, as I was reviewing the final draft of our board presentation, there was a knock at the conference room door. I looked up to find Craig standing in the doorway, expression uncomfortable but resolute. "Got a minute?" he asked, hovering at the threshold. I gestured to the chair across from me, curious despite my wariness. Craig had been one of the most vocal critics of the task force, his objections growing more pointed as our work progressed. Now he sat stiffly, hands clasped on the table between us, clearly struggling with whatever had brought him here. "I've been looking at your data," he began abruptly. "I had some concerns about the methodology, so I reran the analysis with different parameters." I braced myself for another critique, another attempt to discredit our findings. And the patterns hold," he admitted, a hint of reluctance in his voice. "I tried various controls for experience, education, performance metrics. The gender disparities remained statistically significant." I waited, sensing there was more. Craig shifted in his seat, discomfort evident in his posture. I also reflected on some of my own hiring and promotion decisions, patterns I hadn't noticed before. He met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since the stress test incident. "I'm not here to apologize for past actions, but I wanted you to know that I'll be supporting the task force recommendations at tomorrow's department meeting." It wasn't what I'd expected. Craig's opposition had been so consistent, so aligned with his previous attitudes, that this shift seemed almost suspicious. "May I ask why?" He was quiet for a moment, gaze dropping to his hands. "My sister is a software engineer at Telstra. Last week she was passed over for promotion again, despite leading their most successful project this year. When she asked for feedback, her manager told her she needed to be more assertive in meetings." A bitter smile crossed his face. The same manager who told her last year she was coming across as too aggressive when she argued for her design approach. Understanding dawned. Sometimes empathy required personal connection, seeing the issue through the eyes of someone you cared about rather than as an abstract concept. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. "Your support will make a difference." Craig nodded and stood to leave, pausing at the door. "For what it's worth, I was wrong about you. That day with the stress test. What I said was out of line. I thought about pointing out that it had taken him 6 months to acknowledge this, that his out-of-line comment had been textbook sexism, That one moment of reflection didn't erase years of bias. Instead, I just nodded. See you at tomorrow's meeting. After he left, I sat back in my chair, processing the interaction. Craig's support was unexpected but welcome. Another small victory in what was proving to be a marathon rather than a sprint. His story about his sister highlighted something important. The issues we were addressing weren't unique to Vertex. They reflected patterns that existed throughout the industry, patterns that affected women at every level, in every company. This realization solidified something I'd been considering for weeks. Regardless of the board's decision, the work couldn't stop with one company. The data we'd gathered, the strategies we'd developed, the coalition we'd built, all of it had potential beyond Vertex's walls. Perhaps this was just the beginning of something larger, something that could create ripples throughout the tech industry. The thought was both exhilarating and intimidating. I'd never seen myself as an activist or a movement leader. I was an engineer, a problem solver, someone who found elegant solutions to complex technical challenges. But perhaps that was exactly what was needed. Approaching systemic bias as an engineering problem, breaking it down into components, identifying root causes, and methodically addressing each one. I turned back to my presentation, seeing it with new eyes, not just as an internal proposal, but as a potential blueprint for broader change. With renewed energy, I refined the language, sharpened the recommendations, and strengthened the business case. By the time I finally left the office at 2 a.m., the presentation wasn't just good, it was compelling, irrefutable, and visionary. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through my apartment windows as I dressed with unusual care. A charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, minimal jewelry. Professional, authoritative, but not intimidating. These were the calculations women in technology made daily, the delicate balance between being taken seriously and being labeled difficult. Men simply wore suits. Women navigated complex social algorithms with every clothing choice. I arrived at the office early, reviewing my presentation one final time before meeting with the task force for last-minute preparations. The energy among the team was tense but focused, everyone aware of the stakes. This wasn't just about policy changes. It was about challenging the unspoken assumptions that had shaped the company's culture from its founding. Remember, Natalie said as we gathered our materials, we're not asking for favors. We're proposing solutions to documented problems that affect the company's bottom line. She adjusted my collar slightly, a gesture of solidarity. And whatever happens in there, we've already won by getting this conversation started. I nodded, grateful for her pragmatism. Let's make it count. The boardroom was intimidating by design. Dark wood paneling, high-backed leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. 10 board members sat around the massive table, most of them men over 50, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely disguised skepticism. Robert stood as we entered, gesturing us to the empty chairs reserved for presenters. As you know, he began once we were seated, I've asked Chen and her task force to address the board regarding gender equity issues within Vertex Solutions. Their analysis has identified concerning patterns that I believe warrant serious consideration. He nodded to me. Mia, the floor is yours. I connected my laptop to the presentation system, took a deep breath, and began. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board today. Over the past month, our task force has conducted a comprehensive analysis of gender disparities at Vertex Solutions. What we found was a pattern of consistent, measurable disadvantages for female employees across hiring, compensation, promotion, and project assignment. The data visualizations appeared on screen, clear, compelling, impossible to dismiss. I guided the board through our findings methodically, highlighting both the moral imperatives and business implications of addressing these disparities. Companies, with greater gender diversity outperform their less diverse peers by up to 25%, I noted, displaying the research that supported this claim. We're not just losing female talent, we're sacrificing competitive advantage, innovation, potential, and market responsiveness. As I spoke, I watched the board members' reactions. Some took extensive notes, others leaned forward with increased interest. A few maintained poker faces that revealed nothing. One older gentleman, Warren Phillips, a venture capitalist who'd been with the company since its founding, sat with arms crossed, expression growing increasingly skeptical. When I finished presenting our findings and began outlining our proposed solutions, he interrupted. These programs you're suggesting, mentorship initiatives, revised hiring practices, salary adjustments, they all come with substantial costs. What's the ROI? It was the question I'd been expecting, the one that revealed the fundamental disconnect in how diversity issues were perceived. To Warren and others like him, addressing gender disparities was a charity exercise, a corporate social responsibility initiative with questionable business value. I needed to reframe the entire conversation. With respect, Mr. Phillips, you're asking the wrong question, I said calmly. The relevant question isn't the cost of implementing these changes. It's the cost of maintaining the status quo. I switched to a slide I'd prepared specifically for this objection. Our analysis shows that gender disparities at Vertex are currently costing us approximately $3 million annually in increased turnover, reduced productivity, litigation risk, and opportunity costs from homogeneous decision-making. The programs we're proposing have an estimated annual cost of $2 million, with projected savings exceeding costs within 18 months. Warren's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly not having expected such a concrete financial analysis. I continued. Before he could respond, beyond the direct financial benefits, these changes will position Vertex as an industry leader in talent development and retention. In a market where technical talent is the limiting factor for growth, that advantage alone justifies the investment. The room was silent when I finished speaking, the board members exchanging glances or reviewing their notes. Finally, the chair, Ellen Michaels, one of only 2 women on the board, leaned forward. This is compelling work, Ms. Chen. I particularly appreciate the rigor of your analysis and the practicality of your proposals. She looked around at her colleagues. I believe we've seen enough to warrant a formal vote. Unless there are further questions, I move that we approve the implementation of the task force recommendations, with quarterly reviews to assess progress and ROI. The motion was seconded, the vote taken. 8 in favor, 2 abstentions, no opposition. Just like that, months of work culminated in a formal directive to address systemic gender disparities throughout the company. The task force members exchanged subtle glances, professionally restrained in the boardroom, but with clear elation in their eyes. We'd done it. As we gathered our materials after the meeting, Warren approached me, his expression thoughtful. "That was well handled," he said, offering his hand. "I came in skeptical, but you made a solid business case. I'll be watching the quarterly metrics with interest." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. I look forward to demonstrating the results." Outside in the hallway, once the boardroom doors closed behind us, the task force's composure dissolved into subdued celebrations. Quiet high fives, relieved smiles, whispered congratulations. We'd won the vote, secured the mandate, and now faced the even greater challenge of implementation. But in that moment, the victory itself felt monumental. Proof that data could overcome bias, that systems could be changed from within, that collective action could achieve what individual effort could not. Natalie bumped my shoulder gently as we walked back toward our department. "So, lead architect and now corporate change agent. What's next for Mia Chen? World domination?" I laughed, the tension of the morning finally releasing. "One system at a time, Natalie. One system at a time." The implementation phase proved far more challenging than winning board approval. In the months that followed, we encountered resistance at every level, from passive-aggressive compliance to outright sabotage. Managers found loopholes in the new hiring guidelines, claiming no qualified female candidates applied, despite evidence to the contrary. HR representatives accidentally excluded women from interview schedules. Senior developers invented new, unwritten requirements for promotion that mysteriously appeared whenever a woman was under consideration. I expected opposition, but the creativity and persistence of the resistance surprised even me. This wasn't just about policy. It was about power. Who had it, who wanted to keep it, and who threatened the established order by seeking a fair share. Each small victory required twice the effort it should have, draining energy and testing resolve. I began to understand why so many diversity initiatives failed despite good intentions and official support. The system wasn't designed to be changed. It was designed to absorb challenges and continue functioning as it always had. The financial services project became my sanctuary during these battles, a space where code didn't care about gender, where elegant solutions won respect regardless of who created them, where my authority as lead architect was established and unquestioned. I found myself staying later each evening, diving deeper into technical problems that, however complex, felt refreshingly solvable compared to the cultural ones. 8 months after the board meeting, I sat alone in my office at 11 p.m., reviewing security protocols for our payment processing system. The building was mostly empty at this hour, just a few other night owls scattered throughout the floors and the cleaning staff making their rounds. The silence felt companionable rather than lonely, a rare pocket of uninterrupted focus. A knock at my office door broke the spell. I looked up to find Sophia standing in the doorway, expression troubled, a tablet clutched against her chest like armor. "You're here late," I observed, saving my work and gesturing her inside. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then stepped forward, and placed the tablet on my desk, open to what appeared to be a Slack conversation. I found this when I was reviewing the integration team's channel for updates on the API documentation. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly. "I wasn't snooping. I was added to the channel last week, but I thought you should see it." I scanned the conversation, my stomach tightening as I grasped what I was reading. It was a private discussion between 4 senior developers, all men, all part of Craig's original team, strategizing ways to prove the gender equity initiatives were harming productivity. They were deliberately slowing down code reviews for female developers, documenting manufactured issues, and coordinating to create a paper trail suggesting women couldn't meet deadlines or quality standards. One message from Jason was particularly explicit. "We need hard metrics showing productivity drops since Mia's diversity crusade started. Focus on the new female hires. If we can show they're underperforming, we can argue the standards were lowered to hit the quotas." I read through the entire conversation, each message worse than the last. This wasn't mere resistance. It was a coordinated campaign to discredit both the equity initiatives and the women hired under them, including Sophia, whose recent code submissions had been subjected to unusually harsh and nitpicky reviews. When I finished reading, I looked up at Sophia, who stood with arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder. "Thank you for bringing this to me," I said quietly. "This must have been difficult to discover." She nodded, finally meeting my gaze. "They think I'm not good enough to be here, that I only got hired because of some quota. But I graduated top of my class at Carnegie Mellon. I've been coding since I was 12. I worked twice as hard as everyone else to get here, and they're deliberately setting me up to fail." The hurt and anger in her voice struck me deeply, echoing my own experiences, but somehow more painful to witness in someone so early in her career. "You belong here, Sophia. Your work is exceptional, and that's precisely why they feel threatened." She brushed away a tear that had escaped despite her obvious effort to remain composed. What are you going to do? It was the question I'd been asking myself as I read through the messages. The obvious answer was to take the evidence to HR and Robert, demand immediate disciplinary action, make an example of those involved. But experience had taught me that frontal assaults often created martyrs rather than solutions. These men already saw themselves as victims of reverse discrimination. Punishment would only reinforce that narrative. "I'm going to handle it," I said finally, "but not in the way they'd expect. I need you to trust me and to keep this between us for now. Can you do that?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you, but I'm tired of feeling like I have to be twice as good just to be seen as equal." "I know," I said softly, "and that's exactly what we're going to change. Not just, with policies, but with consequences for those who try to undermine them." After Sophia left, I stayed another hour, methodically documenting the Slack conversation and cross-referencing it with code review histories, project timelines, and performance evaluations. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Systematic bias disguised as technical feedback, targeted primarily at female developers, and particularly those hired after the equity initiatives began. Rather than confronting the culprits directly, I spent the next week quietly gathering more evidence, screenshots, metrics, timestamps. I identified which projects had been affected, quantified the delays these tactics had caused, and calculated the financial impact of the deliberate slowdowns. The numbers were substantial. Their sabotage had cost the company nearly $180,000 in wasted developer hours and delayed deliverables. Then I went to Robert, presenting the complete case clinically, without accusation or emotion. "This isn't about punishment," I explained as he reviewed the evidence, his expression darkening with each page. "It's about accountability and transparency. The behaviors documented here have measurable financial impact and directly contravene company policies that the board has approved." Robert's response surprised me. Instead of the immediate disciplinary action I expected, he sat back in his chair and asked, "What do you recommend?" The question caught me off guard. "You're asking me how to handle this?" He nodded slowly. "You've handled everything else about this initiative with remarkable strategy. I'm interested in your perspective on what solution would be most effective, not just punitive." I considered carefully. Traditional corporate responses, formal warnings, sensitivity training, performance improvement plans, rarely changed deeply held attitudes. What we needed was something that would shift perceptions fundamentally, creating understanding rather than resentment. "I want to design a special project," I said finally. "A cross-functional team tasked with developing a new feature for the financial services platform, something high visibility with direct client impact. The team will consist of all 4 men involved in this sabotage, plus Sophia and 2 other female developers they've targeted. I'll lead it personally, with complete transparency in all communications and code reviews. Every metric will be tracked, every contribution measured objectively." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You want to put them on a team with the very people they've been undermining? That's unconventional." "Exactly," I nodded. "They believe female developers are less capable. The only way to challenge that belief is direct evidence to the contrary, working alongside those women on equal terms with nowhere to hide. And if they refuse to participate or continue their behavior, then we have clear grounds for termination that no one can dispute as biased or retaliatory. But I don't think it will come to that. They're talented developers who've forgotten why they became engineers in the first place, to solve problems and build things that matter. This project will remind them." Robert studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he nodded. "You'll have full authority. Budget, timeline, resources, whatever you need. But Mia," he leaned forward, voice serious, "this is a gamble. If it fails, the fallout could set everything back." "I know," I acknowledged, But sometimes transformation requires risk. The project launched the following week, an AI-driven fraud detection system that would become a cornerstone of our financial services platform. I assembled the team as planned: Jason, Mark, David, and Tyler, the four from the Slack conversation, along with Sophia, Priya, and Lynn, three female developers who had faced their targeted resistance. The announcement raised eyebrows throughout the department, particularly among those who knew the history between these individuals. Our first team meeting was predictably tense, with minimal eye contact and stilted conversation. I laid out the project parameters, assigned initial responsibilities, and established the ground rules. All communication would happen in shared channels. All code reviews would follow a structured protocol with objective criteria, and all decisions would be documented with clear rationales. This project has executive visibility and tight deadlines, I explained, maintaining a neutral, professional tone. We were each selected for specific technical strengths that complement one another. Your personal feelings about your teammates are irrelevant. Your contributions, however, are not. Any questions? Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. How exactly were team members selected? The implication in his tone was clear. He suspected the real reason they had been grouped together. Based on technical expertise and availability, I replied evenly, meeting his gaze. Jason, your experience with TensorFlow is valuable for the machine learning components. Mark, your background in financial systems security addresses regulatory requirements. Sophia and Priya, your work on the data processing pipeline makes you ideal for the analytics engine. I continued through each person, highlighting their specific technical strengths with such precision that any suggestion of alternative motives would sound paranoid. No one else asked questions. The message was clear. This was about the work, nothing else. As the team filed out, I noticed Sophia hang back slightly, a question in her eyes. I gave her a small nod of reassurance. The first move had been made. Now we would see how the game unfolded. The initial weeks were awkward but productive. The men were cautious, likely suspecting they were being monitored, but unsure exactly why or how. They maintained professional facades while subtly testing boundaries, suggesting unnecessarily complex approaches to problems, using technical jargon in ways that might exclude the less experienced team members, scheduling discussions at times they knew conflicted with Sophia's standing physical therapy appointment. I countered each move quietly, but firmly. Complex proposals were met with requirements for demonstrable benefits over simpler solutions. Jargon was politely clarified for the entire team's benefit. Meeting times were adjusted with gentle reminders about team accessibility. Throughout it all, I maintained meticulous documentation of both the technical progress and the interpersonal dynamics. The turning point came 3 weeks in, during a critical design review for the anomaly detection algorithm. David had proposed an approach using a neural network architecture that was elegant, but would require extensive custom development. Sophia suggested an alternative using a combination of established methods that could be implemented more quickly and would be easier to explain to clients and regulators. That's a bit simplistic, David responded dismissively. The neural network would give us better accuracy and more flexibility for future enhancements. Actually, Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. I've compiled benchmark data comparing the two approaches. She shared her screen, displaying a detailed analysis of performance metrics, implementation timelines, and maintenance considerations. The neural network shows only a 3% improvement in accuracy, but requires 40% more development time and significantly reduces interpretability, which financial regulators increasingly require. The room fell silent as everyone reviewed her analysis. It was thorough, thoughtful, and irrefutable. The kind of work that demonstrated not just technical skill, but a deeper understanding of the business context. David stared at the screen, clearly caught off guard. When did you have time to do all this? Last night, Sophia said simply. After our initial discussion, I wanted to make sure we were making an informed decision. I watched something shift. In David's expression, surprise giving way to reluctant respect. That's actually really good analysis. I hadn't considered the regulatory angle. The interpretability requirements came up in last month's compliance meeting, Sophia explained. It wasn't widely circulated, but I've been trying to stay ahead of the regulatory trends. The conversation that followed was the most genuinely collaborative the team had experienced, with David and Sophia building on each other's ideas to develop a hybrid approach that captured the strengths of both proposals. For perhaps the first time, they were engaging as equals, focused on the problem rather than their preconceptions about each other. Similar moments began occurring more frequently as the project progressed. Priya's database optimization techniques earned grudging praise from Mark. Lynn's elegant user interface design impressed Tyler enough that he asked for her input on another project he was leading. Gradually, the artificial barriers began dissolving, replaced by authentic professional respect. Not every interaction was positive, of course. Jason remained the most resistant, finding subtle ways to undermine the female developers when he thought I wouldn't notice. But even he couldn't deny the quality of their work or their impact on the project's progress. And as others on the team shifted their attitudes, his resistance became increasingly isolated and obvious. 6 weeks into the project, we hit a major technical obstacle, a data synchronization issue that caused intermittent failures in the fraud detection algorithm. The team gathered in the conference room, fatigue evident in their faces after several late nights trying to identify the root cause. We need to consider refactoring the entire state management system, Jason insisted, frustration edging his voice. The current architecture is fundamentally flawed. That would set us back at least 2 weeks, Priya countered, rubbing her temples. There has to be a less drastic solution. I'm open to suggestions, Jason replied sharply. But no one has been able to fix it yet, despite plenty of attempts. The tension in the room was palpable, exhaustion and stress fraying everyone's patience. I was about to intervene when Sophia, who had been unusually quiet, straightened in her chair. I think I see the problem, she said, pulling her laptop closer. It's not in the state management system itself. It's in how we're handling concurrent updates during high traffic periods. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she explained, if we implement an optimistic concurrency control mechanism here. She turned her screen around, displaying a code snippet she'd been working on. Jason leaned forward skeptically, scanning the code. I watched his expression change as he processed what she'd done. Surprise, then concentration, then reluctant acknowledgement. That's actually brilliant, he admitted finally. Simple but effective. How did you spot this? Sophia shrugged slightly. I've been tracking the error patterns against the server logs. The failures always coincide with specific traffic patterns. Once I saw that correlation, the solution became clearer. Let's implement it immediately, I suggested. Sophia, would you walk the team through the changes needed? As Sophia led the technical discussion that followed, I observed the subtle shift in dynamics. Jason was listening, really listening, to her explanation, asking thoughtful questions, rather than looking for flaws. The others were equally engaged, the shared problem-solving creating a temporary alliance that transcended their differences. By midnight, they had implemented Sophia's solution and confirmed that it resolved the synchronization issues. The atmosphere as everyone prepared to leave was different, lighter, with the shared satisfaction of overcoming a significant challenge together. Good work, everyone, I said as we gathered our things. Especially you, Sophia. That was exceptional. Problem-solving. Jason paused by the door, seeming to wrestle with something internally. Then he turned back. Yeah, that was impressive work, he said directly to Sophia. the most genuine acknowledgement he'd offered since the project began. It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from him, it carried weight. Sophia's surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly. Thanks. Couldn't have implemented it without everyone's help, though. It was a small moment, but I recognized it as significant. The first crack in the wall of Jason's prejudice, a glimpse of what might be possible if we could move past preconceived notions to see each other's actual capabilities. The project continued for another 6 weeks, culminating in a successful client demonstration that received executive praise and an immediate request for expanded functionality. Throughout that time, I watched the team dynamics evolve, not into perfect harmony, but into something increasingly resembling mutual respect. Technical disagreements still occurred frequently, but they centered on the merits of ideas rather than unspoken assumptions about who offered them. On the final day of the project, after the client presentation and celebratory lunch, I called a team retrospective. We gathered in our usual conference room, but instead of diving into technical lessons learned, I took a different approach. Before we discuss the project itself, I began, I want to address something you've all probably suspected but haven't confirmed until now. I pulled up a slide containing screenshots of the original Slack conversation, with names and dates, clearly visible. This is why you were selected for this team. The room went completely still. Jason, Mark, David, and Tyler stared at the screen, color draining from their faces as they recognized their own words. Sophia, Priya, and Lynn exchanged glances, having known about the messages, but not that I would confront them so directly. I could have taken this to HR, I continued calmly. The deliberate sabotage documented here violates multiple company policies and created quantifiable harm to both individuals and projects. Instead, I chose a different approach. This project, this team, to demonstrate something important. I changed the slide to display our project metrics, velocity charts, quality measurements, client satisfaction scores. This has been one of the most successful projects in the company's recent history, delivered on time, under budget, with exceptional technical quality. It was built by this team, the same team that certain members believed couldn't function, due to the presence of quota hires and diversity candidates. No one spoke. The men wouldn't meet my eyes, their expressions a complex mix of shame, defensiveness, and discomfort. I'm not showing you this to shame or punish you, I said, softening my tone slightly. I'm showing you because beliefs change through experience, not lectures. You've just spent 3 months working alongside the very people you dismissed as unqualified. You've seen their skills firsthand. You've benefited from their contributions. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge going forward? Jason was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Why didn't you just fire us when you found those messages? You would have been justified. I considered my answer carefully. Because firing you wouldn't solve the underlying problem. This isn't just about 4 developers at one company. It's about attitudes that exist throughout the industry. Replacing you wouldn't change those attitudes. It would just move them elsewhere. I paused, making eye contact with each of them. I wanted to try something harder but potentially more transformative. So what happens now? Mark asked, tension evident in his voice. That depends on you, I replied honestly. This project has ended, but your careers here haven't, if you want them to continue. What I need from each of you is a genuine reflection on what you've learned and a concrete plan for how you'll apply those lessons going forward. I assigned them each to write this reflection and meet with me individually the following week. As they filed out of the room, visibly shaken, Sophia, Priya, and Lynn remained behind. You knew all along, Priya said, her voice a mix of surprise and admiration. About the messages, about why you put us together. I nodded. I did. I hope you understand why I didn't tell you the full plan. Because we needed to interact naturally, Lynn surmised. If we'd known they were being evaluated, we might have behaved differently. Exactly, I confirmed. This needed to be authentic on all sides to have any chance of creating real change. Sophia studied me with newfound understanding. You could have just fought for yourself, your own position, your own projects. Instead, you're fighting for all of us, even the ones who come after. Her words caught me off guard, touching something deeper than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. I'd been so focused on the strategy, the implementation, the measurable outcomes, that I'd almost forgotten the emotional core of why this mattered so much. We change systems by changing minds, I said finally. Sometimes that happens through policies and procedures, but lasting change requires something more. It requires people to see differently, to question assumptions they didn't even know they held. As they left, I remained alone in the conference room, reflecting on the journey of the past year. From being told women couldn't handle stress to creating stress tests that changed not just systems, but people. The work wasn't finished. It might never be. But standing there, surrounded by evidence of what was possible when barriers were removed and talent was truly recognized, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not the fragile hope of wishful thinking, but the solid hope that comes from seeing tangible progress, however hard-won. My phone buzzed with a message from Robert. Board wants an update on the special project. Impact assessment, next steps, recommendations. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I smiled slightly as I typed my response. I'll be ready. Walking back to my office, I passed Jason sitting alone in the break room, staring into a coffee cup with unusual intensity. He looked up as I passed, hesitated, then called my name. I paused in the doorway. Yes? That thing I said to you, over a year ago now, about women not handling stress well. His voice was quiet, his discomfort palpable. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging his confession. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just factually wrong, but wrong to say it, wrong to think it. I'm sorry. The apology was unexpected, not because it wasn't warranted, but because genuine recognition of harm is rare, especially from those who've benefited from the systems that create it. I could have dismissed it as self-preservation from someone who knew his job might be at risk. Instead, I chose to accept it as what it appeared to be, a small but meaningful step toward change. Thank you for saying that, I replied. What matters now is what happens next. As I continued to my office, I thought about all the battles still ahead, the policies yet to be fully implemented, the attitudes still to be challenged, the opportunities still denied. The work would continue, probably for my entire career, and beyond. But for this moment, I allowed myself to recognize the victory that had already been won, not just in proving my own capabilities, but in creating space for others to prove theirs. 2 years after the stress test that changed my career trajectory, I found myself packing up my office at Vertex Solutions. The walls had been stripped of photos and certificates, my technical books boxed neatly, the award for the financial services platform wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. All that remained was my laptop and the small cactus Natalie had given me when I was promoted. Hardy, resilient, thriving in harsh conditions. Appropriate. I wasn't leaving because of failure. Quite the opposite. The equity initiatives had exceeded our most optimistic projections. Female representation in technical roles had increased from 17 to 34%. The pay gap had narrowed from 12% to less than 3%. Retention rates for women had improved dramatically. The special project with Jason and his colleagues had evolved into a permanent cross-functional team structure that measurably improved collaboration and code quality. Even Craig had become an unexpected ally. championing diversity and hiring for his department after seeing the impact on team performance. No, I was leaving because of success, because the work at Vertex had shown what was possible, and now larger opportunities beckoned. MIT Technology Review had published a case study on our initiatives. Industry conferences had invited me to speak about transforming technical culture. And most significantly, a venture capital firm had approached me with an extraordinary proposition: to lead a new fund focused specifically on technology companies founded or led by women, with $50 million in initial capital and the potential for much more. My role would involve not just investment decisions, but actively shaping the development of these companies, ensuring they built diverse teams and inclusive cultures from the ground up rather than attempting to retrofit them later. It was a chance to scale everything I'd learned at Vertex, to influence the industry at a systemic level rather than one company at a time. The decision hadn't been easy. Vertex had become more than a workplace. It had been the battleground where I'd fought my hardest battles, the laboratory where I'd tested my most ambitious ideas, the community where I'd built my most meaningful relationships. I'd grown attached not just to the people, but to the work itself, the technical challenges that still energized me despite the administrative responsibilities that increasingly filled my calendar. Robert had understood. When I'd shown him the offer, he'd leaned back in his chair with a mix of disappointment and pride. "We can't match this opportunity," he'd admitted. "Nor should we try. This is exactly the kind of leadership the industry needs." He'd offered me a seat on Vertex's board of directors, a part-time role that would allow me to maintain connection with the company while pursuing my new venture. I'd accepted gratefully. A knock at my office door interrupted my reflections. Sophia stood in the doorway, a small gift bag in her hands, her expression a complicated mixture of emotions. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, hovering at the threshold. "Not at all," I gestured her inside. "Just finishing up the packing." Sophia had changed considerably in the 2 years we'd worked together. The nervous junior developer had evolved into a confident technical lead, recently promoted to manage her own team for a new AI project. She still had moments of self-doubt. We all did, but they no longer defined her professional identity. "The team wanted to give you this," she said, placing the gift bag on my desk. "It's from all of us, but especially from the women you've mentored." Inside was a beautiful leather portfolio with my initials embossed in the corner. Tucked into its pocket was a card filled with personal messages, expressions of gratitude, anecdotes of moments I'd hardly remembered but that had apparently meant something significant to them, good wishes for my next chapter. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "This means a lot to me." Sophia nodded, then hesitated, clearly having more to say. "I also wanted to talk to you about something else, something personal." I set the portfolio aside, giving her my full attention. "Of course. I've been offered a position at TELUS Innovations," she said, naming one of the most prestigious AI research firms in the country. Senior developer role, working directly on their applied ethics team. It's my dream job, honestly." "Sophia, that's fantastic," I exclaimed, genuinely delighted for her. "TELUS is doing groundbreaking work. They'd be lucky to have you." "That's just it," she continued, a familiar crease of worry appearing between her eyebrows. "It's such a competitive environment. Everyone there has advanced degrees, publications, years more experience than I do. Part of me wonders if I'd be setting myself up for failure, if I'd constantly be trying to prove I belong there." I recognized the doubt in her voice, the same doubt that had whispered in my ear countless times throughout my career. The persistent question of whether success had been earned or granted, whether the next challenge would finally expose inadequacy. "Let me ask you something," I said carefully. "Did you believe you were qualified for your first position here at Vertex?" She considered this, then shook her head. "Not entirely. I thought I had potential, but I was surprised when I got the offer. I figured there must have been a shortage of candidates. And what about your promotion to technical lead? Did you feel ready for that? A small smile touched her lips. Definitely not. I was terrified the first month, convinced someone would realize they'd made a terrible mistake. Yet here you are, I gestured to encompass not just her physical presence, but everything she'd accomplished. Leading a successful team, being recruited by one of the top firms in the industry. At what point will you accept that you're not just qualified, but exceptional? She didn't answer immediately, absorbing the question with the thoughtfulness that characterized her approach to everything. It's hard to overcome that internal voice, she admitted finally. The one that's always finding reasons why achievements don't really count. That voice isn't going anywhere, I told her gently. The trick isn't silencing it. It's learning to recognize it as fear, not truth. Every significant step in your career will trigger it. The question is whether you let it dictate your choices. Sophia nodded slowly, her expression clearing as she reached a decision. I'm going to take the job at TELUS. Good, I smiled. They're fortunate to get you. I'm still scared, she admitted with a small laugh. But I'm starting to realize that might be a signal I'm doing something right, not wrong. Exactly, I affirmed. Growth happens at the edge of comfort. The trick is distinguishing between productive discomfort and genuine warning signs. As Sophia left, promising to stay in touch and update me on her experiences at TELUS, I reflected on how much she reminded me of myself at her age. Brilliant but uncertain, ambitious but plagued by imposter syndrome, needing not technical guidance, but permission to trust her own capabilities. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Dinner with Natalie at 7:30, my last night in the city before relocating to the venture firm's headquarters in Boston. I sent her a quick text confirming, then turned back to the final items on my desk. Among them was a small USB drive, identical to the one I'd used for the original stress test that had changed everything. I'd kept it as a reminder, a tangible symbol of the moment I'd decided to prove my capabilities rather than just assert them. Smiling slightly, I tucked it into my bag alongside the new portfolio. The restaurant Natalie had chosen was upscale, without being pretentious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights and a menu that emphasized seasonal local ingredients. She was already seated when I arrived, typing rapidly on her phone with the intense focus that characterized everything she did. Sorry I'm late, I said, sliding into the chair across from her. Got caught up with some goodbye visits. She set her phone aside and grinned. You're not late. I'm early, as usual. Couldn't concentrate at home. Too many thoughts about tomorrow's deployment. Natalie had recently been promoted to Director of Quality Assurance, overseeing testing and quality protocols across all of Vertex's products. The role suited her perfectionist tendencies and strategic thinking perfectly. She'd built a department that was respected rather than resented. No small feat in an industry where QA was often viewed as an obstacle rather than a partner in development. How are the preparations going? I asked as we ordered drinks. Honestly, it's the smoothest pre-launch we've ever had, she admitted. The new integrated testing approach is working even better than expected. We're catching issues earlier, resolving them faster, and the developers are actually following the protocols without my team having to chase them down. Culture change in action, I observed, when quality becomes everyone's responsibility, not just a department's job. Speaking of culture change, Natalie leaned forward slightly. Did you hear about Craig's new initiative? I shook my head. Curious. Craig had evolved significantly over the past 2 years, moving from skeptic to supporter of our diversity efforts, but he still occasionally surprised me with his capacity for growth. He's implementing a blind code review system for all new contributions, Natalie explained. All identifying information is removed before review, so code is judged purely on technical merit. They've been piloting it with his team for 3 months, And the data shows female developers' code acceptance rates are now identical to males. I raised my eyebrows, genuinely impressed. That was his idea? Entirely, Natalie confirmed. He came to me asking for help setting up the metrics. Tracking. Said something about wanting to remove unconscious bias from the process. She smiled slightly. I nearly fell out of my chair. Our drinks arrived. A Bordeaux for Natalie, sparkling water for me. We ordered dinner, then fell into comfortable conversation about projects, colleagues, industry gossip. It wasn't until dessert arrived that Natalie brought up what was clearly on both our minds. "So tomorrow's the big day," she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Nervous?" I considered the question honestly. Yes and no. The venture work is exciting, exactly the kind of structural change I've wanted to pursue. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't anxious about leaving the technical side behind. Investment decisions are different from architectural ones. You'll still be evaluating technical merit, Natalie pointed out, just at a different level. True, but I won't be building anymore. That's the part I'll miss most. Creating something from nothing, solving problems with code. I smiled ruefully. I've been a developer for so long, it's hard to imagine not writing code daily. Natalie studied me over the rim of her coffee cup. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were purely technical. Brilliant, but somewhat one-dimensional. I couldn't have been more wrong. Your greatest strength isn't coding. It's understanding systems, both technological and human, and knowing how to change them. She set her cup down decisively. This new role isn't a departure from who you are, it's an evolution. Her words struck a chord, addressing doubts I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. When did you get so wise? She laughed. I've had a good mentor. Her expression softened slightly. Seriously, though, what you've built at Vertex goes beyond code or products. You've changed how people think, about technology, about capability, about who belongs in this industry. That's a rare kind of impact. We lingered over dessert, reminiscing about projects we'd worked on together, challenges we'd overcome, the evolution we'd witnessed in both ourselves and the company. As the restaurant began to empty around us, Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. I got you something, she said, sliding it across the table. A proper goodbye gift. Inside was a beautiful rose gold watch, elegant, but not flashy, with a second hand that moved in precise, measured ticks. I recognized it immediately. The Cartier model I'd admired in a shop window months ago, but had talked myself out of purchasing. Natalie, I protested, this is too much. She waved away my objection. You mentioned once that your father gave your brother a watch when he graduated from business school, a symbol of transition to the next phase. You never got yours. She shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. Seemed appropriate. I fastened it around my wrist, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness. Thank you. I'll think of Vertex and you every time I look at it. That's the idea, she replied with a smile. Can't have you forgetting us while you're out there changing the world. As we walked out together into the cool night air, the city humming around us with its usual energetic rhythm, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: nostalgia for what I was leaving, excitement for what lay ahead, gratitude for how far I'd come from that conference room where Craig had dismissed me so casually. You know, I said as we waited for our respective ride shares. When I built that stress test 2 years ago, I was just trying to prove a point. I never imagined everything that would follow. Natalie laughed softly. Isn't that how all the best stories start? With someone trying to prove a point? The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through my apartment windows as I prepared for departure. My suitcases stood ready by the door, my carry-on packed with essentials for the flight. Most of my belongings had already been shipped to Boston, where a furnished corporate apartment awaited. I'd deliberately left myself an hour before needing to leave for the airport. Time for one final video call that felt important to make. At precisely 8 a.m., my laptop chimed with an incoming call. I accepted, and Robert's face appeared on screen, relaxed and smiling in what appeared to be his home office. "Good morning, Mia," he greeted warmly. "All set for the big move?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, gesturing to the suitcases visible behind me. "I wanted to thank you again, for everything. Your support made all of this possible." Robert shook his head slightly. "I appreciate the sentiment, but let's be clear. You did this. I just had the good sense to get out of your way and occasionally provide resources." We laughed together, the ease of our rapport a far cry from the formal, distant relationship we'd had when I first joined Vertex. Over time, mutual respect had evolved into genuine mentorship and eventually friendship, a transformation neither of us had anticipated. "I do have one piece of news before you go," Robert continued, his expression shifting to something more serious. "The board voted yesterday on my recommendation for my successor when I retire next year." This caught me by surprise. Robert had mentioned considering retirement, but I hadn't realized a decision was imminent. "That's significant. Who will it be?" "Natalie Park," he said simply. Unanimous approval. I felt a surge of joy and pride so intense it momentarily took my breath away. "Robert, that's perfect. She's absolutely the right choice." "She is," he agreed. "And do you know what clinched it? The quality metrics from the past year." The board was impressed not just with the numbers, but with how she transformed the entire approach to quality, making it central to our development process rather than an afterthought. The significance wasn't lost on me. Natalie would become not just Vertex's first female CEO, but one of the few women leading a major technology company nationwide. And she'd earned it through exactly the kind of systemic thinking and collaborative leadership that our industry desperately needed. "Does she know yet?" I asked. Robert shook his head. "I'm telling her this afternoon. Wanted you to hear it first, given your role in her development. She probably wouldn't have stayed at Vertex if not for your mentorship." "She would have excelled anywhere," I countered truthfully. "But I'm glad it was here." We talked a while longer about transition plans, board meetings I would attend remotely, projects that were in progress. As our conversation wound down, Robert asked a final question. "Looking back on everything that's happened since that stress test, if you could go back and give advice to yourself from 2 years ago, what would you say?" I considered this thoughtfully. "I'd tell myself that proving people wrong isn't the end goal. It's just the beginning. That changing minds is harder than building software, but infinitely more impactful. And that sometimes the most important code isn't what we write in languages like Python or Java, but what we write into company cultures and industry practices." Robert nodded appreciatively. "That's why you're going to transform venture capital, the way you transformed Vertex. You see beyond the immediate problem to the systems that create it." After ending the call, I moved through my apartment one last time, checking drawers and closets, making sure nothing essential had been forgotten. In the kitchen, I watered the small herb garden that would be passed to my neighbor later that day. In the living room, I adjusted the blinds to protect the furniture that would remain until the lease ended. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender's address caught my eye immediately. Jason Peterson with the bye. Subject line, "Wishing you well." Curious, I opened it while waiting for my ride. "Mia," it began, "I heard today is your last day before heading to Boston for your new venture. I wanted to reach out and say something I should have said much earlier. Thank you. Not just for the technical knowledge I gained working with you, but for the harder lessons, the ones about assumptions, bias, and missed opportunities. I've been reflecting a lot on that stress test and everything that followed. When you first exposed those Slack messages, I was defensive and angry. I felt trapped and manipulated. But over time, I've come to recognize it as one of the most important learning experiences of my career. I'm now leading development at a startup focused on educational technology. We're building a diverse team from the ground up, not because of quotas or external pressure, but because I've seen firsthand how homogeneous teams miss critical perspectives. Half our engineering team is female, including our CTO. The work we're doing is better because of it. I still catch myself making assumptions sometimes. Old habits die hard, but now I recognize them and correct course. That awareness is entirely due to you and the way you chose to address the problem, not through punishment, but through demonstration. Good luck with your new venture. The companies you fund will be fortunate to have your guidance. Jason. I read the message twice, unexpectedly moved by its candor. It was a reminder that change, when it happens, isn't always visible in real time. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, in private reflections and quiet course corrections that only become apparent much later. My ride arrived, the driver helping load my suitcases into the trunk. As we pulled away from the apartment building, I took one last look at the city skyline, at the Vertex offices visible in the distance, at the life I was leaving behind to pursue a broader vision. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, new doubts, new battles to fight. The venture capital world had its own deeply entrenched biases and resistance to change. The companies we funded would face skepticism and barriers simply due to their founders' gender. There would be failures alongside successes, setbacks alongside breakthroughs. But I was no longer the same person who had sat in that conference room 2 years ago, stinging from Craig's casual dismissal. Experience had taught me that systems could be changed from within, that demonstration was more powerful than argument, that the most effective revolution wasn't loud and dramatic, but persistent and evidence-based. As the city receded behind us, I thought about all the women who would lead the companies our fund would invest in, their innovations, their obstacles, their determination. I thought about Sophia starting her new position at TELUS, bringing her unique perspective to AI ethics. I thought about Natalie preparing to become CEO, transforming Vertex in ways I couldn't yet imagine. A message appeared on my phone from the venture firm's founding partner. Team assembled for initial briefing. 6 promising candidates for first funding round. Excited to begin. I smiled and typed a quick response. On my way. Let's build something extraordinary. The highway stretched before us, leading toward the airport and beyond it, Boston. A new city, a new role, a new chapter. I glanced at the watch on my wrist, its second hand marking time in precise measured intervals, a reminder that change happens both gradually and inevitably, moment by moment, decision by decision, proving points that become foundations for larger transformations. 2 years ago, I had coded a stress test to demonstrate a system's capacity to handle pressure. That test had revealed strengths and weaknesses, bottlenecks and breaking points, not just in software, but in people and organizations. Now I was embarking on a larger test. Whether an industry built by and for a narrow demographic could be reimagined to include diverse perspectives and talents. It wouldn't be easy. Real change never is. But as the city disappeared from view and new horizons emerged ahead, I felt ready for whatever challenges awaited, equipped with evidence, experience, and the quiet confidence that comes from having already proven what was possible. 5 years into leading the Vertex Women in Tech Fund, I found myself standing on a stage at the annual Global Technology Summit, addressing an audience of industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and investors. The journey from writing code to allocating capital had transformed not just my career, but my understanding of how change truly happens in an industry resistant to it. When we launched this fund, I explained to the attentive crowd, conventional wisdom said there weren't enough women-led tech companies to support a dedicated investment thesis. People told us we'd be limiting our returns, compromising our standards, or forcing diversity at the expense of excellence. I paused, letting these tired arguments hang in the air. 5 years and 37 investments later, our portfolio has outperformed market benchmarks by 23%. The companies we've funded have created over 4,000 jobs, secured 212 patents, and changed their respective industries in measurable ways. The data displayed behind me told a compelling story, not just of financial returns, but of innovation unleashed when artificial barriers were removed. Our portfolio included companies revolutionizing healthcare technology, sustainable energy, financial access, education, and more, all led by women who, in previous eras, might never have received funding despite their brilliant ideas and exceptional execution. After my presentation, during the networking reception, a young venture capitalist approached me, excitement evident in her eager expression. "Ms. Chen, your fund's thesis has completely validated what many of us have believed for years," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Jamie Winters from Sequoia. We've just launched an initiative focused on underrepresented founders based largely on your model." I smiled, genuinely pleased to see our approach spreading through the industry. "That's wonderful news. The more funds recognize this opportunity, the faster we'll see meaningful change." "Though I have to ask," Jamie continued, her voice lowering slightly, "how do you respond to critics who claim you're merely chasing a trend? Just last week, Reinhardt from Foundry Capital suggested at a panel that diversity-focused funds are prioritizing optics over returns. The question didn't surprise me. I'd heard variations of it countless times over the years. "I invite those critics to examine our audited returns," I replied calmly. "Numbers don't have opinions or biases. They simply reflect reality. And the reality is that diverse teams consistently outperform homogeneous ones when given equal access to capital and opportunities." Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found a quiet corner to check messages before heading back to my hotel. Among the emails was an unexpected name, Sophia Martinez, now the CTO of TELUS Innovations, Ethical AI Division. Her message was brief but momentous. "We got it. Full regulatory approval for the medical diagnostic system. Your seed funding 3 years ago made this possible. 6 million patients will benefit in the first year alone. Thought you should know." I felt a surge of satisfaction as I remembered our initial investment in Sophia's spin-off from TELUS, a diagnostic AI system designed specifically to address health conditions that predominantly affected women and had been historically under-researched. The technology had shown remarkable promise, but larger funds had balked at the market size and regulatory hurdles. We'd provided the initial $3 million that kept the project alive, followed by participation in 2 subsequent rounds. Now it was poised to transform women's healthcare worldwide. This was the true measure of our fund's impact, not just financial returns, though those were impressive, but the tangible ways we were changing lives through the companies we supported. Each investment represented not merely a business opportunity, but a correction to historical imbalances in resource allocation, attention, and problem-solving priorities. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to join a virtual board meeting for Vertex Solutions. Though I was now based in Boston, I maintained my board position, contributing strategic guidance while observing the remarkable evolution under Natalie's leadership as CEO. The company had nearly tripled in size, expanded internationally, and developed a reputation as one of the most innovative and inclusive employers in the industry. "Mia, perfect timing," Natalie greeted as my video connected. "We were just discussing the acquisition offer from Tech Dynamic." The proposed acquisition had been circulating for weeks, a generous offer from one of the largest technology conglomerates, representing a substantial premium over Vertex's current valuation. The financial case was compelling, but questions remained about cultural fit and the preservation of the values we'd worked so hard to establish. "What's the current thinking?" I asked, noting the thoughtful expressions around the virtual table. "The numbers make sense," Robert acknowledged. He had officially retired but remained a special advisor to the board. "But there are legitimate concerns about what happens to our people and our culture if we're absorbed into a much larger entity with different priorities." Natalie nodded. "I've had several conversations with their executive team. They're saying all the right things about preserving our culture and approach, but their own diversity metrics tell a different story. Less than 15% women in technical roles, almost no representation in senior leadership." "Have they acknowledged this discrepancy?" I asked. "They call it an area for growth," Natalie replied with a slight eye roll. "They've suggested our practices could help them improve." I considered this carefully. That could be genuine. They recognize value in what we've built and want to learn from it. Or it could be acquisition language that disappears after the deal closes. The discussion continued for another hour, exploring alternatives, negotiation strategies, and potential compromises. Eventually, we reached a consensus. We would propose a modified deal structure with specific, enforceable commitments around maintaining Vertex's inclusive culture and extending those practices throughout the acquiring company. "It's a bold counteroffer," Robert observed. "They might walk away." "Then we continue independently," Natalie said firmly. "We're profitable, growing, and building something that matters. We negotiate from strength, not necessity." As the meeting concluded, I felt a profound appreciation for how far we'd come, from a company where women were told they couldn't handle stress to one where values and culture were considered non-negotiable assets, even in acquisition talks. Whatever the outcome with Tech Dynamic, Vertex had already succeeded in demonstrating a better model for the industry. The following morning, before flying back to Boston, I visited the Vertex offices for a scheduled mentoring session with their RAW, Emerging Leaders Program. The building was different, larger, more modern, but the energy remained familiar. The creative hum of collaboration, the focused intensity of problem-solving, the dynamic exchange of ideas across diverse perspectives. In a glass-walled conference room, 15 young professionals awaited me. Engineers, product managers, designers, and data scientists, evenly split between men and women, representing various backgrounds and experiences. These were Vertex's future leaders, selected for both technical excellence and leadership potential. "I'm curious," I began after introductions, "what questions you have for me. What would be most valuable for your development?" A young engineer named Miguel raised his hand first. "How do you balance technical credibility with broader leadership? I love coding, but I'm increasingly drawn to strategic and cultural aspects of the company. Does advancing mean leaving behind the technical work I enjoy?" The question resonated deeply, echoing my own journey. "That's a tension I still navigate," I admitted. Technical expertise gives you credibility and insight that purely managerial experience can't replace. The trick isn't choosing between technical and strategic focus, but finding ways to maintain both, even as the balance shifts. I shared practical approaches, blocking time for hands-on work, staying current through focused technical projects, leveraging deep domain knowledge when evaluating new directions. Throughout our conversation, I emphasized that leadership in technology wasn't about abandoning technical roots, but about extending their impact through others. As our session concluded, a young woman named Zara lingered behind. "Can I ask something?" "More personal?" she ventured once the others had left. "Of course," I encouraged. "I've been offered a significant promotion," she explained, leading a new machine learning initiative. "It's an incredible opportunity, but I'm 6 months pregnant." She hesitated, vulnerability evident in her expression. "Part of me feels I should decline because of the timing, that it's unfair to the team to take on leadership and then take leave. Another part feels I've earned this and shouldn't let pregnancy alter my career trajectory." Her dilemma illustrated how far we'd come and how far we still had to go. That this conversation could happen openly represented progress, but that she felt conflicted at all reflected persistent cultural expectations about motherhood and career advancement. What would you advise a male colleague who'd been offered a promotion but had a major life event coming up? I asked gently. Surgery that required recovery time, perhaps, or needing to care for a parent. She considered this. I'd tell him to take the promotion and work with the team on transition planning. The same applies to you, I noted. Pregnancy isn't a career liability. It's a life circumstance that requires accommodation, like many others. The qualities that make you right for this role won't disappear when you become a mother. As we talked further, I shared my observations from dozens of portfolio companies, how the most successful organizations treated parenthood as a normal part of career development, rather than an exceptional circumstance requiring special justification. I connected her with several women in our network who had navigated similar transitions successfully. By the time I left for the airport, Zara had decided to accept the promotion, her initial uncertainty replaced by thoughtful planning for how to manage the transition and set her team up for success during her leave. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Another incremental step toward normalizing women's full participation at every level of the industry. On the flight back to Boston, I reflected on these interwoven journeys. My own path from developer to investor, Vertex's evolution from typical tech company to industry exemplar, the broader shifts happening across the ecosystem as more women gained access, authority, and capital. Change wasn't happening as quickly as it should, but it was happening, accelerating with each success story, each data point, each barrier removed. My laptop open before me, I reviewed investment memos for 3 promising companies we were considering for our next funding round. Each represented a unique approach to solving significant problems through technology. Each was led by extraordinary women who, in previous generations, might never have had the opportunity to build their visions. Each stood poised to create ripples of change far beyond their immediate business objectives. This was the legacy of that moment years ago, when a dismissive comment about women handling stress had sparked not just a demonstration of individual capability, but a systematic dismantling of the assumptions behind it. From stress tests to structural change, from proving a point to proving a model, the journey had unfolded in ways I could never have anticipated, but now couldn't imagine differently. As the plane began its descent into Boston, I closed my laptop and gazed out at the city lights emerging through the evening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles worth fighting. The work wasn't finished, might never be finished in my lifetime. But looking at how far we'd already come, I felt something beyond mere optimism, a deep, grounded certainty that the direction of change, however uneven its pace, was irreversibly forward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.